stories will thrive. Welcome to another video by the Blue Tongues of Hell for some more Hilder Chronicles. This chapter is called Milkwell. A faint mist lingered over the snowy fields opposite Delivarga River. King Ogni stood patiently on the other shore, hoping to spot a deer or a flash of golden hair between the milkwood trees or dead ferns. Further down the river, a series of statues could be seen, sculpted by no other than the king himself in his younger days. He had carved the massive slabs out of Nibelungen's slate into watchful ravens, guarding the natural border between the lands of Vanaheim and Helheim. For how long the realms had been at each other's throats, he could not say. The old ravens were witnesses to the never-ending feud, and Ogni felt himself turning to stone, waiting for a neglected loved one to appear from the past. He knew that Skuld had been there all these years, watching over him while he lost his battles, his wife, and the will to fight. Every time he set out for the woods to hunt or pretend to, he knew she would be there, somewhere, respectfully out of sight, unwilling to undermine him.
When did I lose my mind? Since when do we thrive on respectability and appearances? Wage war on the wood folk. To hell with you, Gunnar. You don't deserve to live here. And the Huldra certainly don't deserve us. I should have married you years ago. Although you haven't aged a bit since we first met. How could you ever still love me?
Ogni thrust his sword into the thawing snow on the clay riverbank and lowered his head in despair. That's when he thought he saw a firebird floating down the river. When his eyes focused on the curious sight, Ogni felt the island crack in two. A trail of blood poured from a mane of gold. Skuld's golden hair. He dived into the freezing water and dragged Skuld onto the same inlet where he had found his daughter playing with a snake. Her skin was light blue, and her face was a picture of sorrow. The king held her against him, as if to warm her dead body. He opened his jaws and screamed, deafening silent scream, leaving permanent wrinkled grief all over his face. When he closed his bloodshot eyes, he felt a shudder of hope when Skuld's skin shriveled to soft velvet brown. But there would never be any hope left in the king's heart. The doe was dead too. Ogni carried Skuld to the raven statues. He wouldn't burn her and sent her body to where she didn't belong. She belonged with him, and here is where he would bury her, and where he would join her soon. Two oversized swans glided on the surface of an egg-white underground pond. They exchanged a subtle look and shed a tear, almost in perfect synchrony. A drop of white liquid fell from a white stalactite and sent rings of ripples towards their slender feathered bodies. The heavy-hearted moment passed as discreetly as a calm breeze through weeping willow branches, and the swans lowered their necks to watch the now immaculate plate of milk they were bathing in gently deform. The tip of a nose of china rose out of the water, and a shiny face emerged, trailed by the body of a young woman. Sune was lost in anxious daydreams. He couldn't begin to fathom why Voluspa would abandon him. Not a word from his mother, not a single message. Had she been snatched by the villagers, or fallen down a well again, or simply died of old age? He snapped out of his desperation when the swans suddenly trumpeted in unison. Sune lifted the bedraggled body of Hilda out of the white waters and laid her down on the white clay floor. He used a blue cloth to delicately wipe the milky moisture from her skin, slowly rubbing her limbs with mortuary dedication. He cradled Hilda for a while, humming an odd tune from long ago. The swans fluttered their wings, and Hilda began to shiver, choke, and violently shake in spasms. She spurted out a river of warm milk from her mouth that the splattered floor immediately absorbed. Drowned, and now you are reborn. Where am I? Asked Hilda, smelling willow catkins in the air. She had a splitting headache and heard echoes of a distant waterfall. Sune, said the two swans in thought. Where is the monarch of the howling cauldron? Verdandi, Irpa, I don't know. I've told you 1,000 times already. This fall has suffered 1,000 deaths or more. Is she the Milkwell monarch now? Is that possible? We are home, under the ash of Hildur. Sunni rubbed his tired eyes and helped Hildur to her feet. He replied to the swans, I don't know. You should know more than I, although you don't get out much, do you? Why would we need to do that? We are guardians of Milkwell. The well needs us, and we need to swim the white waters. When she fully wakes, you'll know if she is what we suspect. Do you think she crossed to the other side? Asked Sunne, placing his arm inside a hole in the white wall where a round door was situated. When she wakes, you will know. If she growls or squeaks, you'll know the answer to your next question.
If you say so,
replied Sunne, feeling his skin being prickled by the door's lock mechanism. The exit slid downwards, along with metal rings of feather teeth that sank into slits in the ground. Hilda gazed at Sunne with dopey eyes, then pushed him aside. She staggered forwards and felt her way along the dark tunnel, slanting uphill. The swans circled away over the milk pond and trumpeted their goodbyes. Eleonora was in the kitchens, giving the new cooks the grand tour. She showed them where the pails and brushes were to mop up the blood, and was about to explain what her culinary preferences were when she saw her highly esteemed guard gunner sneak out of the pantry. He hadn't expected the Queen to return so soon, without Toki, or the king, and knew he would have to drop his plans for the day to suit the queen's mood. Now, I know you don't need to be reminded what happens to traitors, said Queen Eleanor, nodding to the bloodstains. But I would like you to meet the man who saved me last night from a distasteful death. I haven't had the time to thank you yet, Gunnar. She took his gloved hands and gave them a kiss. Whatever could we do to repay you for your swift bravery? Gunnar observed the two young women intently and huffed.
Nothing, I am afraid. I was only doing what was expected of me.
After the Fox fiasco, a few loose ends had to be tied up, especially the former cooks, who were now tied up below Cronelgar Castle in Gunnar's dungeon, to be dealt with later. Please, let us treat you to your favorite dish. What would please you the most?
If I told you, you wouldn't have a head to see what I'd be doing to you.
Gunnar closed his eyes and inhaled deeply.
Well, if I must, Arctic fox on a stick would have been perfect. But I will go for mushrooms and roasted dough instead. Rare, if you have any chops at your disposal.
Anything you wish, said Eleanor. Rest by the fire and put your feet up. You haven't seen Toke, have you, by the way? Gunnar felt a tingle of electricity run down his spine. He shrugged in denial and quickly left the cooks to their affairs. On his way to the Grand Hall, one of his spies brought him an intercepted Vulcan message. It was addressed to Asmund. Apparently, the witch was somehow in Helheim's custody, or a guest they claimed within the White Walls. Prince Hedil himself requested a parley amongst the heirs to the throne, alone, at the tip of Dragon's Tail, which meant the place where Elivargar River splits in two around a small islet of protruding rocks called Odin's Eye. Gunnar was not convinced that the prince would make the necessary choices. He was infatuated and weak, a recipe for disaster. This was most possibly another trap, and if not, a rare opportunity to capture Helheim's heir to the throne and force the enemy's hand. Lunch was not yet served. Gunnar sat at the dining table with Asmund and Eleanor, waiting for the king to return from his hunt. Nibbles, anyone? Asked Eleanor, passing some marinated dough entrails around the table. The kitchen really needed some new blood. No pun intended. And the chefs seem to know what they're doing bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, if you get my meaning.
Not quite, my dear. Care to elaborate?
Said Asmund dispiritedly. This one's a keeper, said Eleonora, plopping a morsel of meat into Gunnar's mouth. Saved me from poisoning, killed the perpetrators, and now they've been replaced by better chefs.
If you don't mind me saying,
Replied Gunnar.
I think I have proved the opposite to that saying. We've always despised the cooks around here, and we've found a better replacement since their demise. I always thought it meant that if you take a bird away from its habitat, like a hedge sparrow from its nest in a bush, then you are depriving nature of two possible eggs,
said Sten, the royal head groom, seated farther down the table.
We never see the beauty that's right before our eyes,
said King Orkney warily, covered in mud and blood.
Don't get up. Let us eat.
The king sat at the head of the table. He looked as though he had a foot in the grave, eyes distant and lost. What happened? Are you all right? Asked the queen, genuinely concerned.
Not now.
Gunnar flicked two fingers, commanding the cooks to hastily bring in the meal. Asmund had too much on his mind to be burdened by another one of his father's hunting accidents.
Gunnar, Falcon arrived. What was the message? Perhaps not the right timing, Prince Asmund.
He replied.
Go ahead, Gunnar,
said the king, under his breath.
Very well. Your son has been summoned to Odin's Eye this evening for a parley, exclusively between heirs to the throne. The message comes from Helheim. And?
Said Asmund impatiently.
And Prince Hedil himself specifies that our enemies have captured the woman from the sea, Kyoko, our former prisoner.
Asmund rushed to his feet, slamming a chair backwards to the floor, but the king bellowed at him to sit, which he did.
My son, you lack patience and foresight. Who knows what their real intentions are? They have her, Fadir. You don't expect me to sit here and do nothing, do you? They trespassed onto our lands and kidnapped her. And technically, Nebelwood belongs to all the realms,
said Sten.
or no one,
replied Gunnar.
All things being equal, we must act cautiously and plan this parley with great care. We could have Prince Hedil fall into our plate willingly, and risk having Kyoko murdered,
said Asmund, gripping the table knife. Eleanor gestured him to put his antics on pause as the cooks hurried in from the kitchen with an enormous plate of roasted dough. Ogni recognized the smell without looking at the dough's sagging head still attached to the cooked meat. And he felt his bowels twist. His throat burned as bile filled his mouth and dribbled over his cracked lips. He gaped at the approaching dough in terror, falling backwards off his chair. He shuffled his feet and hands on the floorboards, trying to get away, and moaned. Everyone was baffled, wondering what had really happened to the king on his outing. Without warning, he got up and staggered to the table. He grabbed the plate and sent it crashing to the floor. The dough's head cracked on a wooden pillar, and after the cooks had run off in tears, the hall fell silent. Nobody dared interrupt the awful still. In a low, faint voice, the king murmured,
"Tonight, we will not go to the Eye of the Plains. We will summon every last fighting spirit we have left in this realm and deliver a final blow to Pass Castle. Prepare the cavalry. Gather the troops. It ends tonight."
King Ogni left the table and walked past, the dough carcass staring up at him. He placed a stool in front of the roaring fireplace and used it to reach the iron gripper gloves hanging from the wall, still warm from the flames below. He put the gloves on and punched his metal fists together. In his mind, a din of thunder shook the eardrums of everyone around as he summoned his people to the final battle. In retrospect, the iron gloves made a tinny clinking sound when they crumpled together. But no one was foolish enough to speak their minds. The king then turned to those seated and drew his sword, the deadly Dane slave.
Now unsheathed, only death may follow. Only death may follow. May your victims howl in agony, my king,
said Stan, standing to raise his own sword,
Oh, they will. That I can assure you.
replied King Ogni, tears pouring down his cheeks.
To war!
Asmund looked at what his father had become. An empty shell. A frail memory of the feared demon he used to be. Whimpering for no good reason.
What a fool.
Asmund slipped away discreetly to the stables and left at once, hoping to reach Odin's eye in time. He wouldn't let anything happen to Kyoko ever again, whatever the price to pay. Gunnar had guessed Asmund's intentions, like reading the stars, and informed the king of the prince's betrayal. Ogni did not react as planned, and slumped into his chair by the fire.
Should never have returned,
Mumbled the king.
my lord.
I fear your son has turned against us, that he will join the enemy to save the woman he loves, whispered Gunnar into his ear.
He will do what he has to do.
Said Ogni.
At least he has the balls to run into the jaws of hell and fight.
I don't follow, sire.
I don't blame my son. He is braver than his father in many ways. But he will be used as a smokescreen while we crush Helheim. Now leave me and prepare for war.
Gunnar raised his eyebrows and left the dour king to mope alone. Queen Eleanor had been busy that afternoon. She was doing all she could to take the dinner incident off her mind and forget about the upcoming battle. Would it be the end of this debilitating war? Her husband wasn't himself, and she was dead certain the blonde woman in the woods was to blame. The forest folk will pay too, one day. Gunnar, you can take a break from annoying the berserkers and upsetting the horses. I have something to show you.
Not now, Your Highness. We have urgent matters to attend, if you haven't noticed.
Eleanor gave him a smile with stern slit eyes. You will do as I command. Gunnar found himself surprisingly out of ideas and was forced to follow her to the stables and ride east towards the shore. The final battle was upon them. What was she up to? The sun bathed the shore in an unusual heat. The snow was thawing quickly, and the sea was no longer a prison wall of ice. 3 guards were standing on a massive eggshell rock, gazing out to the distant low tide, surreptitiously creeping closer over the dough-brown sand. The beach was covered in dried-out seaweed that crackled under the boot. Crabs scuttled from one green cluster to another, keeping out of the angry sun. Eleonora called out to the guards, and they looked down to the beach one last time and walked away. When Gunnar peered over the barnacle rocks to see what was below, he felt a needle prick in his neck. It wasn't the shock of seeing the traitor Toki chained to a rock that caused a similar painful sensation of alarm, but Eleonora's deft fingers digging a poisoned needle into his spine. Yes, he did mention that you knew of his cowardice and dishonesty, said Eleonora, holding Gunnar as he fell to his knees like a doll. Gunnar tried to mutter a bundle of excuses, but only bubbles of saliva exited his lips. You two rascals, always eager to be elsewhere when I didn't have sufficient information to divulge. You must have thought so highly of me. Who could blame you? I didn't see you two worms coming, did I? Worms indeed. Pathetic maggots, she exclaimed, clawing his bandaged face with sharp nails. Take this back to your masters, she added, kicking the sack of flesh and bones over the edge. Gunnar grazed his head and torso and broke a wrist when he hit the hard sand. I could wait here to watch the ravens peck at your flesh and crabs nibble out your eyeballs. Or if I cared a little, I might stay until high tide and enjoy your last bubbles of air pop out of the sea. But you know what? I don't want to see you two insipid limpets one moment longer. Enjoy Yvonne's nightcap. She made it especially for you, Gunnar. Good riddance. Gunnar's body was almost entirely paralyzed. His right ear was stuck in the sand, and he groaned as he failed to move his body round towards the horizon. Was it worse not seeing the water rising, or an ironic last strike of luck? Regardless, something else was rising. An acute wave of pain was spreading from his toes to his shins. Bones felt like they were being splintered. A spiraling terror awakened as the sound of metallic pebbles being brushed by the tide grew louder and louder, distorting and spitting out of control. He screamed inside his skull, and the pain continued to rise, burning his pulverized nerves. For a rare moment in time, Connor couldn't control a thing, and he felt water splashing against his thighs. Although the sea was still far out. Talkie whimpered with fluctuating tones that had a windy cavern-type quality. His wailing turned to snickering as he admired his companion's plight. When he gazed back at his sliced-off genitals being devoured by oyster catchers, the snivelling resumed. Blood dripped onto their beaks as they swallowed the shriveled flesh. Hilda could hear muffled lamenting in the distance. Someone calling her name. She watched her family having lunch without her. Not one person mentioned her absence. They waited for the king. But did they bother to care about what had perhaps happened to the Princess of Vanaheim? Not the slightest. When her father fell to the floor like a terrified kitten, skeletal hands tugged at her shoulders, trying to pull her away. She fought them off erratically, as if brushing off sticky cobwebs, but her hands passed through the bony fingers. The vision of her father burying a dead doe waxed and waned as fast as a curtain being drawn, and the skeletal hands went dark grey. Powerful Drogue arms pulled her willowy body out of the howling cauldron and threw her onto the floor. Long blue tongues retracted and sank into the fiery well. Hilda tittered, as if she had gone mad.
I told you to stay away from the well,
Growled Sunne, shifting back to his normal form. He hadn't quite mastered the restraint, as Voluspa called it, and still felt the urge to lick her thumping heart. Hilda looked straight through him, still drowning in the magnetic flames. Apart from her childhood friend, she was certain that nobody else would bat an eyelid if she listened to the calling voices and jumped down the well. The doors behind them slid open, and 3 Drogues entered the chamber, with blood all over their faces. They said nothing to Sunne and ignored Hilda, sitting at his feet. All three were calm and had a graceful step. They opened their stained sacks and tossed a bustling litter of squirrels and rabbits into the well. When they had emptied their bags, they bit their palms and shed a few drops of their own blood into the simmering blue. The well seemed to exhale in delight, and the drogs solemnly walked away. Hilda gave Sunne an inquisitive look, and he said,
A lesson for another day.
"Could you show me the other wells first?" said Hilda softly. "How many are there?" Sunne hesitated, waiting for Voluspa's wiser judgment, then replied,
There are 3 at the tips of the 3 main routes.
"So there's only one left for me to visit."
True. Perhaps neither Carr nor Vor would mind if we pay them a visit. Although I doubt Carr will be present.
Out of the blue, Hilda asked, "What is an Orn monarch? Why did the swan say I had suffered 1,000 deaths?" Sunne was caught off guard. How could she have heard the Norn Guardian's conversation? Unless... when she fully wakes, you'll know if she is what we suspect.
Follow me, Hilda. I'll tell you all you need to know.
He said in thought. Hilda frowned as Sunne quietly left the chamber. She followed him along the tunnels, and Sunne could not conceal his mixed excitement and perplexity. So much was changing, too fast. See you soon for the next chapter of the Hilda.